We're live. This is Gava Guy. I'm here with Floyd FP. What's the FP stand for, Floyd?
Nothing really.
Okay. um, so the hangout topic is really just kind of focusing back on the conversation that I had with Matt Slick. I've not been super active on G Plus Hangouts since that time, and I kind of wanted to have one hangout where I got to look back at the conversation that I had with Matt Slick. It was a couple weekends ago. I had hoped to actually jump back in with Matt Slick last weekend, but my computer was broken, so I was completely out of commission. Apart from just a few comments or whatever through my phone on G Plus, but joining in on a hangout was not an option for me at all. So anyhow, to kind of start things off, I wanted to point out the fact that the topic that I joined Matt Slick's or this is on the Bible Thumping Wingnuts channel. The reason that I joined that hangout was to ask Matt Slick about slavery in the Bible. And what didn't happen is that Matt Slick really didn't provide an answer to the questions that I asked him. And instead, what he did was deflect until we moved from the topic of slavery to the topic of secular morality, and then finally to the questions about logic and things. And it was really just an intentional derailing. And any, he moved to these philosophical questions that I may not be philosophically informed enough to provide a decent answer. I don't think that there are probably many people on G Plus who could provide answers, especially just on the spot in a casual conversation to some of the questions that he was asking. But that doesn't mean that he is right, and so that's kind of the first point that I wanted to draw out. Floyd, did you want to make any comments about that?
No, I mean I can address specific questions or topics that were brought up. I thought he was all over the place with slavery. He was trying to argue that slavery is wrong, yet if it's wrong, and why it's wrong was that we're made in the image of God, so you don't treat an image of a God like that. But in the Old Testament, people were treated that way, so it's a totally bogus argument. It's a
right.
Totally invalid argument.
Yeah, and it doesn't solve the problem. It just creates more problems for it, because either you have the choice of either morality changed, the nature of what is moral, what is good, changed between the Old Testament and the New Testament, or there's portions of the Old Testament law that were immoral. So you just can't have both things go on at the same time.
Yeah, and asserting, oh, well, that's the old covenant. That doesn't matter. His God gave commands to people of how to act. So it doesn't matter if, to say, oh, well, that was the old days. Well, his God is supposedly unchanging. So at some point in history, his God commanded people to take slaves and basically, treat them like you shouldn't treat the image of God.
Right. Either that, or those laws weren't actually from the deity that he suggests that they are.
Yeah. In that case, then the Bible is an inspired, inerrant word of God, like he claims.
Right. Yeah. And you can be a Christian and believe that things are not inerrant. So there's a way out of it, but just not within the framework that he's working with. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was really the kind of the final few moments of the conversation. And I think this is an important argument to address, because he has raised it repeatedly in a number of different hangouts. I remember he raised this same argument when he was talking with Skylar Fiction, and the argument essentially goes, if you can't provide an explanation as to the origins and nature of logic, the laws of logic, then God is the only alternative explanation. Now, he doesn't parse it quite in those terms. What he usually says is there are only two choices: God or not God. And then he poses the question: you believe that there's not a God. Can you explain, or can you provide an explanation for the laws of logic? And if the answer is no, then he thinks that by default, God is the winner, and that's the only possible way that you can have an explanation for the laws of logic. So, Floyd, do you want to tackle the problems with that argument?
I mean, there's a lot of problems with that. It's totally fallacious. It's argument from ignorance, got all the gaps, false dichotomy, you name it. You could have multiple things account for logic. Everything he mentions could either account for logic or not account for logic. If he thinks his God can account for logic, well, he needs an argument for that, not this this other thing can't account for logic, therefore my God does. Well, I guess what he does, and what presuppositions do, is they'll say A or not A, but not A is a infinite number of things.
Right.
So saying that a few things within that set of not A doesn't account for it, you can't say therefore A accounts for it. And who's God? His God? No, you could have the God of logic account for logic, or the pixie, the logic pixies account for logic. But how does a person actually account for logic? I'd like to hear that argument from him.
Yeah. I want to bring up this example real quick. So this is a counter argument that I would have kind of thought of in the time since the hangout. I'm not particularly quick on my feet if I haven't thought through a problem, and I should have maybe put together something to respond to that, because I had been exposed to his posing that in the past. But so anyhow, I'm not good at calculus. I've never taken a calculus course. I was good at math. I was good in algebra. I took algebra in college, like a college level algebra class, but I never got to this kind of stuff with like Archimedean spirals and wave functions and things like that. So you can make a dichotomy about anything the way that Matt Slick does, and I could say, okay, dogs or not dogs can explain calculus and Archimedean spirals. I'm not a dog, and I can't explain. Therefore, dogs can explain the Archimedean spiral in calculus. I mean, that argument has the same validity and weight as his argument for logic and the deity, because you haven't exhausted the not part, that negation, by asking one individual that falls into that category. And even if we had the ability to ask all of humanity whether or not they could account for logic, that doesn't mean that just because nobody knows the answer, that his explanation gives the problem. Just like my dog, my dog doesn't have the solution for solving an Archimedean spiral. Uh, and even if I asked all of humans and nobody could understand calculus to that level, that doesn't mean that my dog can. So it's not. It's just not. It's completely problematic through and through. So I don't know. I didn't really have a whole lot of material for this, just because it wasn't a huge long conversation. I was in there for more than half an hour in that hangout, but we covered a lot of ground in that short amount of time. As far as the conversation goes, he talked about morality. Maybe we can touch briefly on that, and just the kind of the deflection tactic that he used there. So when I said, I object to slavery, his counter was, well, on what grounds? And Floyd, what would you say to that?
I would argue that I'd argue the golden rule for one. I wouldn't want to be treated as a slave, therefore I'm not going to treat others as a slave. It simply creates a bad society. It creates suffering. It makes a worse world for everyone to live in. That's why it's wrong. So if you're just going to assert the golden rule, I think that's enough to say slavery is wrong. In a lot of talks with theists, they bring up the open question problem, where you can always ask, well, why is that wrong, or why is that good? And when you give an answer, well, say, well, why is that wrong, or why is that wrong? And you keep on going on and on and on. You have to start. You have to start with some, moral value. And like, for example, the golden rule is, don't treat others like that you wouldn't want to be treated as, or morality is based on avoiding human suffering and making living a happy life. So once you have that value in place, you can then draw moral facts from that. But you can always argue, well, why those values and not other values, and so forth. But you can do that with anything. You can do that with theist morality as well. So, oh, well, God decides what's wrong. Well, why should we listen to this God? Or because God says it, how does that make it wrong? Well, they'll say, well, that's just the way it is. That's how we define it. Well, okay, well, this is how we define it as well. So, either side, it doesn't matter. But you just have to, I think either side just has to accept those moral groundings and work from there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so two things. One is I think it's just nothing more than a deflection from the subject matter. So even if I had no grounding for my own moral values, and I had no explanation for them at all, that doesn't mean that I can't ask him to give an account of his. He can provide an explanation and do what he's asking me to do. And the fact that when I ask, and I point to what I believe to be a problem, a consistency problem within his worldview and moral framework, pointing to mine and saying, what do you have, is really a diversion, especially when you have someone who is claiming to have the ultimate truth and the ultimate and perfect conception of moral truths. I think that person has that much more of an obligation. I'm a human being. I can get things wrong, and I often do, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I want to improve. I want to get things right to whatever degree that I can. But having said that, I'm fallible, and I make mistakes, and I want to learn. One of the things that I saw in some of the comments and things, well, you could have held him to impressed him on that subject, and it's true. From on one hand, I think there's value in pointing to the fact that this person is deviating from the conversation topic, and saying, look, you're deflecting. This is the question that's on the table, not whether or not I can give a framework that's satisfactory to you, but we're talking about your moral framework and your worldview at the moment. We can go to mine, but let's deal with this first, and kind of holding their feet to the fire. And when I'm in these conversations on G+, I really am interested in the truth. And if there's a problem with my own construct and understandings and explanations, I want to know it. I sincerely do. So I'm willing to go that route and explore my own moral frameworks and things. I'm not opposed to that in any way, but I think it's also good to, if that's being done and if it's being used as a tactic to at least highlight that and draw a circle around it and say, this is what was going on. And I think Trey Jadlow does that a lot too. You ask him to account for X, and he'll immediately turn the table and say, well, how do you justify what you want to say? Which is, I think in both cases with Matt Slick and Trey, it's a complete tactic. It's just a rhetorical tactic that they use.
Yeah, it's a typical tactic of a presuppositionalist. They'll just divert to your worldview. They'll say, how do you account for this? Like you bring up Bible criticism or contradictions or the immorality of their God and so forth, and they'll just throw right back to you. Well, you brought up morality. Okay, well, by what standard? But what's your standard? Okay, now they turn it back on your worldview. Or if you make any truth claim, you brought up that's a knowledge claim. How do you account for logic in your worldview? Now you're in a discussion about epistemology,
right?
They have scripts, so to speak, to just divert anything back to your worldview, and it's just that simple. I just brought up two examples of how simple it is to divert it back to your opponent's worldview.
Yeah. So I don't think I'm going to prolong this any longer than that. That's really the bulk of what I wanted to hit, and I don't want to have this be a long drawn out thing. I do hope to jump back in with Matt Slick in the coming weeks. So I guess watch for that. If it depends. The time that they air their show is not particularly great for me personally. So it's just kind of hit and miss. But I enjoy it. Even though I get muted and have my volume dropped and things while I'm in there, I think that in and of itself is telling, and the fact that he's got two guys on either side or more than two even, who are not even contributing to the conversation, but just playing referee and bouncers basically. It's pretty sad.
One thing Slick argues is that that logic is conceptual, and for something to be conceptual, well, that's all in someone's mind. Concepts only exist in the mind, which I agree with. But then he'll argue, it's like, well, if there are no humans, like in our worldview, there's no mind of God, and so basically, the only ones who can really perform logic are humans or perhaps higher primates. But let's say all those minds no longer existed. He would then claim, oh well, but the laws of logic logic wouldn't disappear. Logic universal and absolute. So therefore, you can't account for logic, because if there were no minds, and since logic is conceptual, then you can't say logic would no longer exist just because there's no mind. So therefore, you can't really account for logic in your worldview. But he's conflating two things. He's conflating the use or application of logic, which is very much language dependent, to the veracities of using and applying logic. Like the law of identity, for example. It's true. If there were no minds, there would be no minds to perform logic. Logic is an activity. When you do an argument, that's a conceptual thought. I totally agree there. But he somehow thinks like truce, for example, is like a Platonic form. Like it's out there, either in the Platonic realm, or you need some God. You need a ultimate mind to possess these things, and his God fits that bill. It's like, okay, his God already existed, so the laws of logic already existed because they're always in the mind of God. But with atheists, they don't have that, so therefore atheists cannot account for logic. But the thing is, it is based on truth, and if you subscribe to the correspondence theory of truth, that means it corresponds to reality. Now, in reality, there can be like identities such as rocks or planets or you name it. Things that are totally independent from minds and so forth. But truths are again corresponds to reality. So truth only exists within minds. So again, it's back in the minds. Reality can exist without minds. Identities can exist without minds. A can be not A without minds, where like a rock is not let's say, I don't know, a tree. But again, if you're going to apply logic, use logic, that does require mind. So I really don't see an issue here. He's conflating the use of logic with the truths of logic, which are two separate things.
Yeah. Well, and even there, it's he wants to say that like all that exists are matter and concepts and things. I remember the discussion between Matt Slick and Matt Dillahunty, and he was trying to push Matt Dillahunty into this corner of the choice between concepts and matter, and Matt Dillahunty wouldn't commit necessarily to that logic even falls into concepts that are mind dependent, and when Matt couldn't provide an answer as to what they were, or what they consisted of, Matt Slick wanted to say, well, I've got you, haha, but Matt Dillahunty pointed out, you believe in this deity that exists, and you don't think that he's matter, material, substance, but you also wouldn't say that he's conceptual. So what is he? And Matt Slick, I mean, I think that's a good counter argument there, that there might be something else. We might not know what it is. We have reason to believe that logic exists in some sense, whether or not we can fully articulate exactly how, or we essentially come to know it just by living our lives and learning and interacting with the world, and we have to be taught these things, which is another thing that a lot of the presuppositionalists will say, is that we, or at least I know that that John Lawn guy, presuppositionalist John Lawn, has said this, that we are born with inherent knowledge of the laws of logic, but that's not accurate. That children have to be taught those things. We've been joined by Cliff Stamp. Cliff Stamp, I believe that you are a Christian. Is that right?
No, not at all.
No. Okay, I'm sorry. I, I'm not familiar with you. I've seen you in some of the conversations, just in text and things. What are they called? It's late on a Friday night. My brain's not working quite the way it should.
Isn't the argument, though, that Slick makes not about our knowledge of logic, but why is the universe logical? And he claims that if you posit a Christian dream,
Cliff, I'm sorry, your volume just dropped. I heard you at first, and then it kind of faded.
let's see.
That's better.
Let's see if we can say isn't the argument that he makes that God is the reason for the universe being logical, and without God, there is no reason for the universe to be logical?
Boy, you faded again into nothing. I heard. So you were saying that the argument is that God is the reason that the universe is logical.
That's the argument that he makes. See if I can figure out what's going on with my microphone.
Well, why is that? Because God's logical. I mean, all you can say, you can argue what Carl Sagan says. Why not save a step and to say the universe in itself is logical? But that's confused actually. Logic is not really about reality. Logic is about all possible worlds, real and unreal. So to ask, how does how do you know logic corresponds with reality? It doesn't. It applies to all logical worlds. Yeah, you can have a logically valid syllogism, but it could still be false. Garbage in, garbage out. So again, it's all possible worlds, just not this world or any real world.
Right, but you can still ask a basic question like, why is gravity attractive?
Why is gravity the way it is?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. And I guess that's something perhaps science can answer, but eventually you're just going to reach a brute fact. Why is something the way it is? Well, that's just the way it is. That's its nature.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's not too satisfying, but but you have to ask yourself: do we have to have an explanation for everything? That's a question of philosophy. Must we have an explanation for everything?
I don't think we need to have an explanation, but what Matt Slick does, what a lot of these people do, is they say, we have an explanation, you don't, but you reject our song. So if you say, well, you don't know Slick says,
Boy, that's so weird. I'm sorry. Yeah, you keep, it starts off fine, and then it just your volume just drops off a cliff. Maybe try and refresh Cliff Stamp. So I caught a good chunk of what he was saying, but then it dropped off at the end.
But logic has to do with relationships, right? It's a relationship between things. Like if you have A and not A, okay, well that's a relationship between A and what everything else, or not. So you have an apple and you have an orange, but you could have a unicorn and a dragon as well. Again, it doesn't have to be something that actually exists in our world. But it's describing the relationships. Now, imagine you have three apples on the table. Well, you could see the relationship between those three apples, but you could have 10 more apples in the refrigerator. Why? What limits this relationship to three? Well, it's us, the observer. We just observed three apples on the table, but in reality, does reality just think there's three apples? No, it's just in our perspective. So it's we're just describing what we're observing at the time. Reality doesn't see three apples. In reality, there's three apples and 10 apples, in the refrigerator, and a bunch more apples at the store, and a whole bunch more apples, hanging off the tree. So a lot of it's the application here is a human use, and is very language dependent.
Right, but there's a difference between talking about logic as we use it and the actual order that's in the universe.
Right. Those are two separate things.
Right, and when they're saying that God provides the foundation for logic, while they often confuse it, their actual argument is he provides the foundation for the universe itself being ordered. The laws, the actual words that we use, are irrelevant. I mean, we created those. But basically, the argument they make is if you take the Christian God, specifically the Christian God, away, there's no reason for the universe itself to be ordered. So then the question becomes, under your perspective, there is no reason. Under our perspective, there is. Don't we have the superior position?
Well, I mean, you make and I pointed this out to Matt Slick. You can make the claim, but unless we have a universe that doesn't have a God to make the comparison and say, okay, well, this is what we could expect to find in a universe that doesn't have a God, and this is what we can expect to find in all universes that do have a God. Then we have a case to be made, assuming that we also have some evidence that the God actually exists, or whatever, for those universes that are ordered. What if we find universes with no gods that are ordered, and some universes with gods that aren't ordered? I mean, and who's essentially begging the question.
Yeah, who says the default state is chaos? They assume a lot of theist arguments assume that without a God, without an orderer, there would just be chaos. Well, why is that? Why is chaos the default state? It could be the case that there could only be order.
Reality might be the case that reality could not even exist in chaos, and that's right. I mean, and that seems actually very likely that if things were not ordered, that there would be nothing, and that the only reason that we have what we perceive around us at all is because that's the only possible way things could actually be maintained.
And I think there's a distinction there as to there are certain requirements in this universe for it to be life. For example, gravity has to be attractive. That's one of the ways stars form, planets form. Gravity has to be attractive. But it's very difficult. So in order for there to be life, you could say gravity has to be attractive. That's true. So you wouldn't find a universe with people in it if gravity wasn't attractive, because you wouldn't get stars or planets, to the best of our knowledge. But then to say the universe gravity has to be attractive is a very difficult statement to make, especially if you look at it from under naturalism. Like from looking at it under physics, you look at these things, why is gravity attractive? Why is cause and effect? Why is there order? What is the reason for that? Like I said, the argument that Matt Slick makes is we can provide a reason. You just say, well, it just isn't. We don't know, but yet you just completely ignore our side. And when you ask about like what is the evidence for God, that is the evidence. That's the evidence, is that they're providing an explanation. That providing the explanation is one of the fundamental reasons that we accept. That's what we use as evidence for claims, that they provide explanations.
I mean, just because it provides an explanation doesn't mean that it's valid. I mean, like Zeus is an explanation for lightning, and before we had a more scientific understanding of the causes of lightning, uh, you could have made the same kind of argument that without Zeus, we don't have an explanation for lightning. So therefore, Zeus is the best explanation. Um, it's still not a valid explanation that this deity is out there making lightning, right?
That's critical. It's trivial to say just because you have an explanation that there are other things, and that's the problem that people don't challenge Matt Slick on. And the example that I brought up in the comments was just trivial. If I was over to your house and you got injured, and I demonstrated a significant amount of medical knowledge and skill, and you were surprised, and I said, well, I'm actually a trauma surgeon. My explanation that I'm a trauma surgeon explains what you actually saw. So then my explanation you tend to believe because it explains what you actually saw. But simply saying, like you said, Thor explains lightning, therefore Thor is through, there's a difference between them, and that difference is what people don't bring up to Matt Slick.
Yeah, I mean,
I kind of have a question for Floyd.
yeah.
So when you were bringing up the open question problem, you were demonstrating how the open question problem is a problem regardless, right? It's a problem for them too. Well, I think the answer is wrapped up in God's nature, similarly to the morality thing. And I'm wondering, what might you say to that kind of a response?
Well, why is God's nature good? It can keep on going. It doesn't have to end there. It keeps on going. What makes it? What attribute? What properties of God's nature makes it good?
Well, if we try to apply it to this logic business, right? Because I think that they're claiming that they have an endpoint where you don't, and that their endpoint is God. And either some people say that God created the laws of logic. Some people say the laws of logic exist because kind of God is that, along with all the other things he is. So they're saying that they have an end. They have a stop, whereas you are stuck with no stop.
Well, for morality, again, what is your standard of morality? They'll ask, and that's the stopping point. And for many secularists like myself and humanists, morality is based on human needs, to avoid human suffering, to achieve human happiness. So that's the value. You start with moral values, and then you derive moral facts from your values. So your values is the stopping point, or the foundational, the foundation of it. So that's how I would respond to that. And what does it mean for God's nature to be logical? What exactly does it mean? Arguments are logical.
I think it means,
syllogisms are logical. How is a person's ontological nature logical?
Because he's his father and his son at the same time, as well as some other third thing.
Let's be serious. It's the fact that we use logic and that we discovered logic, right, rather than invented it, for example, or we discovered these three absolutes. Let's just go there, right? Is a demonstration that we reflect God, that God made us in His image.
Oh, I I mean, it's the same as the capacity, and so do we. But so what? I mean, again, with Occam's razor, we can just eliminate God. We can just have the capacity to be rational. Why do you need a God for that?
Well, but if you say we don't need the God for that, then you are subject to the open question problem with respect to logic, right? You can continue to say, well, how is it that that is right, and how is it that that is right, and how is it that that is right?
You're talking about how you establish logic is valid?
I'm
not sure I apply the open question to logic.
So I think that's kind of what Matt Slick seems to be doing, at least with Run, right?
Yeah, he did
there's-
kind of press that line a little bit with me.
Yeah, there's two questions here. How do you account for logic? And when they say account, they say, what's your story for where it comes from?
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
And then another question is, how do you know logic is valid? Whatever you answer, that second question, however you answer, it's going to be circular. Valid in what way? Logically valid? to argue, to make any argument, to answer that question in any way, you would have to use logic. Therefore, you're begging the question. You're assuming the validity of logic to prove the validity of logic.
Well, but don't you think that?
I think what they're really asking is the first question: where does logic come from? I think that's what they're really asking.
That's what they're. I think that's probably true.
Give me the once upon a time story for logic.
Yeah.
And theirs would be God's nature is logical, and so that is reflected in His creation, and we just happen to pick up on it because we're like Him.
Well, I mean, that doesn't answer anything. Imagine if I asked you, why do sleeping pills put you asleep? And you say, oh, because of its dormitive nature. It's sleep-inducing nature. So in other words, sleeping pills put you to sleep because they have the nature to put you to sleep.
Yes, but
it's not an answer.
What they say, right?
It's not an answer. It's totally vacuous. It's meaningless. Or why is fire hot? Fire is hot because of its heat-emitting nature.
Yes.
So fire's hot is because fire's hot. It doesn't answer a thing.
Well, but they say that they are at least at the bottom, whereas you can't even go to the bottom, right? I can explain. God and His nature, and He gives us all of these qualities that we have, including the ability to be rational, whereas you have no clue where it comes from.
Well, where do I, in my worldview, how do we have the capability of being rational? Oh, our minds evolved that way.
Well, what about
through millions of years of natural pressures and selection? That's how we developed our rational minds.
Okay, so what he does in that case, right, is he actually doesn't do what I did. He starts with getting you to agree to certain aspects of these absolutes, right? That it seems reasonable to me, at least, to agree. Although I have hesitations, but these laws are not inventions. They hold. They seem to hold. They would seem to hold no matter what kind of a world it was. I mean, A could never be not A at the same time, no matter where you are.
Right.
You agree to all those things, and then he's right. You really cannot account for them in any way other than circularly.
Well, it's how the terms within logic are defined. Say if I ask you, what makes it the case that stallions are male horses? What strange force? What great force made it so stallions are always male horses? How would you answer that?
I would say, well, we've just defined it that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's confused to say that something made it that way. That why is it the case? Well, that's just how we define it. That's what it means to be a male horse.
But the thing that he's saying is coming from God is the act of being able to consistently define something and having that system hold under every circumstance.
Well, logic holds the way we define if-then, the truth tables of and, or, not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's how we defined. That's how we defined those terms. There would be no law of non-contradiction, for example, if the word and not did not exist, because of what those terms mean. The law's the law of non-contradiction comes about. If there was no word not, if we didn't understand the word not, there couldn't be the law of non-contradiction.
I think that he could somewhat persuasively argue against that by talking about the things that those noises refer to, right? Are you saying that if we didn't have the word not, suddenly a rock could be something else at the same time? No, you're not. You're not saying that.
Well, we're talking about the application or use of logic to the truths of logic. Those are two separate things. So that's what he'd be conflating there. Truths, if no minds existed, truth would not exist. Does that make sense to you? I'm making the claim, if no minds existed, truth would not exist. You can say, whoa, wait a minute, Floyd. Well, if before humans ever existed, other things existed, and it's true that those things existed, therefore truths existed before humans. What are you talking about, Floyd? See,
well, he wouldn't say that. He's saying that
you're conflating truth with reality. Those
I
are
think
two
he's
separate
saying,
things.
honestly, that the state of affairs that now that there are minds or human minds, describe with the words that you used, would nonetheless be the state of affairs were there no human minds. I don't think that he's conflating them. I think that he means to discuss what it is that those noises refer to.
Right.
And so when he says a rock is a rock is a rock is a rock, that's what he means.
Well, yeah, and when you say mean, yeah, you're using logic at that point. So a rock, a rock has always been a rock, right?
Right.
Right, or a tree or a plant or whatever. Those identities have always existed, and the minute you have something else other than a rock, okay, now you have rock and not rock, right?
Right.
So when you apply that in language, okay, that's the concept of or the use of logic at that point. That requires a mind. But the relationships between rock and not rock, okay, they can exist independently. But no logic is being applied in that case. You simply have a rock and something else.
So you think that he would agree that no logic is being applied to the state of affairs that makes it so that in no possible world could a rock be other than a rock at the same time and in the same way?
No.
I think that he would say, no, that is transcendent logic. That's what I'm talking about, the reality of the situation.
Right, that would be the reality of the situation, that there's a rock and not a rock. Okay, so why do we need a mind for that, or why do we need a God for that?
Yeah, it's not as if a God could have made it other than that, right? The God thing doesn't add anything necessary to that. The equation still stands. A is A, and A is not A. Those are it's the way it is, and he couldn't have made A equal not A. No matter what, that it just wouldn't work.
It would be nonsensical. It wouldn't make sense. You would be, you wouldn't be describing any A. When you have an identity, you're discussing some sort of boundary or limitation. When you distinguish one thing from another, you're saying these have certain characteristics or limits or attributes, and that's different from something else. So again, why do we need a God for this?
I wonder if you would say that God could have done it some other way, and what seems chaotic now would seem orderly then. Or I wonder what he would say.
And there are other problems with this whole, trying to kind of abscond with the concepts of logic. Is it's not outlined in the Bible. We don't get this from the Hebrew Bible. We don't get A equals A. A does not equal not A. These things weren't given to us by Yahweh or Moses or Jesus. They were given to us by the Greeks. So that's problem one. Problem two is the very doctrine that's central to what Matt Slick identifies with his theology has this Trinity idea, which is contradictory in and of itself. I mean, there's a deity who has a son, and the son is also the deity. There's a problem there logically. The fact that there's this third something involved with it, and that they are all three not the same, but also the same in some sense. These are problems that the church struggled with, but because of the writers of the books that they accepted into the canon, they had to do something with it. And so the church fathers eventually just accepted the contradiction and said, let's go with it.
Yeah, and let's just say it's not a contradiction.
Yeah.
Let's just claim that it's not one. Period.
Right.
Yeah, that really bothers me, that Trinity thing. It just really
and then to say
gets under my craw.
Then to say that this same contradictory entity, it's his nature, that logic is his nature, and that all logic comes from him, when he violates the laws of logic himself in his own doctrinal teachings there. It's just...
Did you happen to bring that up with him, Ron?
I don't know if I did in this one. I've mentioned it before in other hangouts and things.
What does he say?
I don't know if I brought it up to Matt
something
Slick.
like that.
Yeah, I don't know if I've brought it up to Matt Slick in person.
You
No.
probably won't get very far arguing that either Jesus is a contradiction or the Trinity is a contradiction. There's a wealth of Christian doctrine on why they aren't contradictions.
But have you been able to make heads or tails of it?
Yeah, well, say, for example, people often think it's a contradiction to say Jesus is 100% man, 100% God, right? That sounds like it's a contradiction.
Yes.
Right? But it's not. What it means is that Jesus has a physical body, and his physical body was 100% man. If you walked over and chopped off Jesus' arm, it would behave just like if you chopped off my arm. His physical body was 100% man. But he had a supernatural aspect, was 100% God. Jesus could perform miracles. He could do whatever, and he says, like, there's parts of the Bible where he says, I have all knowledge, and I have the complete will of the Father, and a bunch of all these other things. I don't have them all memorized.
Yeah.
But his supernatural aspect was 100% God. He was unlimited. But his human body was 100% human. Therefore, he was 100% human and 100% God.
Yeah, so it split personalities. It had two personalities.
And then he's
One where he admits ignorance.
Right.
He says, I don't know when my return will be. Only the Father knows. So therefore, he's ignorant. But God's supposed to be all-knowing. So what's going on there? Was only his human side just talking there, and his God side was being suppressed? What's going on there exactly?
Well, that's the same thing as in, there's a part in Genesis where God says something like, he's searching for Adam and Eve, he doesn't know where they are. There's a bunch of places where this is brought up in the Bible where God says something like, I don't know, or I look for people, right?
Absolutely.
That isn't saying that God doesn't know. It's using, as they say, allegorical language. It's God communicating himself to us. Like these things
I could maybe accept that with respect to Genesis, but they're not going to say that that's what the Trinity is all about. That it's just allegory. They really are trying to say that he's 100%, and even if you say he's 100% physically human and 100% supernaturally God,
right.
To me that doesn't make sense, because when it comes down to taking actions and doing things on the planet, some of that supernatural stuff's got to go toward the human stuff. I mean, how does his brain work and that kind of thing? I mean, some of the things that appear to be supernatural turn out, when you think about it, to have been responsible, it seems, by the human 100% part. And so he can't really be 100% physically human and 100% non-physically supernatural.
Yeah, like all his physical part is 100% human. So like right now I'm a person, right? Not a god,
Yeah.
as far as I know. I'm 100% a human. But
Yes.
just imagine that tomorrow I discover I have some kind of supernatural ability, whatever it is. I'm still 100% human in my physical body.
No,
You
you're
scan my
not.
brain,
That part of you that's not of humanity
right?
takes from the humanity part. It's not like love. It's not like you have an overflowing abundance. You only have a cup. You only have 100%.
Right.
Yeah, if you discovered, let's say
Go ahead.
tomorrow that you have 5 more arms, well, humans have 2 arms, so to speak. If you discover something more about you, well, yeah, you're more than just human.
Yeah, but not physically. Like again, so tomorrow you do a scan, and everything physically about me is the exact same scan I am right now. But
Okay.
tomorrow I have supernatural abilities. I can raise people from the dead. I'm still 100% a man. In any way that you check me physically, I'm exactly the same as I was the day before. My DNA is the same. Physically, everything about me measures exactly the same. But now, for some reason, I can start raising people from the dead. So I have this supernatural ability. But I'm still 100% a man in regards to my physical nature. But I have a supernatural ability. Like, that's not a contradictory
I
statement. It's just
understand that.
that's,
I mean, I get that.
so that's all they're saying with Jesus is 100% man, 100% God. They don't mean the same things. It's the same way I could say, for example, I'm a father and a brother and a son. They're not contradictory, right? They're talking about different aspects. You know, I'm not a father and a son and a brother to the same person. They're different
Yeah,
relationships.
yeah,
Right?
that's different modes, different relationship. It's modalism.
Well, I think that they're moding supernatural. They're giving it its own mode.
Well, but in some sense, Jesus is the Son and the Father at the same time, right? I mean,
Yeah, the
there's
supernatural part of them is.
I don't know. It doesn't make sense. I mean, what would his DNA look like if half of his DNA is God's?
His DNA is 100% physical.
Well,
So his
where
body is
did the other
100%
half
physical.
come from?
That's the supernatural part, right? There's no way to measure it. That's why it's supernatural. You can't
So
naturally.
what's his DNA going to be? A complete replica of Mary's?
That's a good question, right?
I don't think.
Right?
I mean, he's
think
got to have half from the male contribution. Actually, not quite half.
That's an
Almost.
interesting
very
question. I've
close
never
to
heard
half.
anyone
Y
ask that.
chromosome. Wait, it's so like.
No,
okay,
I'm really serious about the DNA question.
right. Well, and I think it's a fair question. So, but the law of parsimony, I would think, says it came from Joseph, right? The Y chromosome came from Joseph, not Yahweh.
Well, but no, you can't say that if you don't believe that.
Well, yeah, a Christian
Right?
wouldn't accept
I mean,
that.
of course, that's what I would say.
That's a much simpler explanation for it.
Absolutely, yes, it's more simple. But let's just grant that that his father was Yahweh, and that Yahweh gave, however they say it. To me, I can't imagine being Mary, but I don't want to get off on that. But I mean, then what would his DNA look like literally? What was he? Was he
I think it's an
conceived in some
interesting
bizarre
question.
way? Was he didn't go through any meiosis at all? I mean, seriously.
I don't think they considered that problem when they wrote the story. So,
But they must think of it now.
yeah, well, see, I mean, a lot of questions
we laugh it
arise
off,
now.
but I'm really sincere about this. I really am sincere about this.
Yeah.
If it's 100% human DNA, then whose DNA makes up the other half?
Well, I think, like, again, since you're dealing with, I mean, God, who created, again, from their perspective, God created man, right? So God would have just created a unique DNA for Jesus, I'm assuming is what they'd say. So it wouldn't be Mary's. It's Immaculate Conception. Like, Mary is the host of God. So when God came down and inhabited man, basically, it's boom, he has Jesus' DNA. I'd assume what they'd say. It's not the same as any other man. I guess, I bet you that's probably what they'd say.
But then
can make
why
up
would you
anything.
Mary? Mary's just an incubator.
No, you can make up
Why
anything.
do the Catholics care that she never sinned and all that?
You could say you had Mary's DNA and the Father's DNA, the Father's spiritual DNA.
I mean,
you can make up any story. You know?
I mean,
But then he's not 100% human. He's at least half the Father's DNA.
Yeah, I mean, like all this, just to get to the whole term demigod. Like what's wrong with that?
It
I mean,
doesn't
I mean,
sit well with theologians.
because that's technically what it is. I mean, like friggin', like it's when the father is the father's a deity. Well, not necessarily. When one parent is of divine origin and the other one's a human, basically. That's what it is.
Hercules.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess getting back to logic again. What does this God provide for there to be logic? Why is a God necessary to bring logic to the world? Again, I brought up the example of all it takes for there to be logic is just any relationship.
Yeah, but I think, again, we need to clarify, when they say God is providing a source for logic, they're not talking about the laws. They're not talking about the way we describe it. What they're actually saying is, and the easiest way to understand it is to go back to the source. You go back to Van Til. All these people are repeating Van Til, right? What
Yeah.
they're saying is that the universe itself works in such a way that if you put people in it, they can, the laws of logic, they'll see the laws of logic, they'll be able to talk.
You're
But
right.
God is the reason why the universe is that way. Like, he's
That's
the reason
right.
why cause and effect is there.
That is what they're
That's-
saying.
That's
So
the
Yeah,
argument.
but now it's gotten worse. Now it's gotten with that Site 10 clone stuff. It's basically nowadays the argument goes like the Christian worldview can account for like all these all knowledge, including like philosophical problems that have puzzled philosophers for centuries, like the problem of induction, solipsism, and all this. And absent of the skeptic or atheist or whatever that doesn't make the same claim, unless he does, like they're basically left with the metaphysical implications of those things, and that's just asinine.
Yeah, but again, and logic doesn't apply to reality. Logic applies to all possible worlds. It doesn't have to, it can apply to things non-existent as well. It just talks about relationships in concepts. So, but to apply it to universe, like why is the universe this way? Why is the universe logical? As though logic is the universe is required for logic. No, if you're applying logic, again, you're just applying the relationship of concepts to one another.
I mean, because the universe exists the way it does, it was really just a matter of time and variation for our species to like apprehend this thing. I mean, it's really language. Logic follows necessarily from language. Otherwise we can't be able to describe any of these things, put them in perspective, like mathematics or computer science or linguistics or anything like this. I mean, it's really just like you said, like explaining things that are possible, that makes sense to us. Like, I mean, a cat that's all black and all white simultaneously is nonsensical. So it's really about like describing things, not prescribing anything.
Yeah, because that's why for us to say something's all black. Once you apply white or any other color to it, okay, it's no longer all black. Well, why is that? Because that's what all black means. There's nothing mysterious or nonsensical or strange about this.
Or absurd or anything. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I
So
mean,
why can't something be all black and all white at the same time?
why can't there be? Because it would make the term non-black meaningless.
Right, I'm not talking about the terms, not talking about the language. I'm talking about underneath that. Why couldn't an object exist that was all black and all white at the same time?
Law of non-contradiction.
Right.
Also law of identity.
Right, so why are they true? Why do they hold? And again, I don't care about the laws, don't care about the words. Why is the universe in such a way that a thing couldn't be all black and all white?
Again, it doesn't apply to the universe. It applies to all possible worlds.
Right,
Yeah,
but I'm asking
really,
the question, right?
Because
Why-
again, that's how we define it. You're using language. Just speaking this, you're creating terms. You're creating definitions.
Yeah, it's really based on it's based on like our senses, like through our brains and stuff, and how we're able to like generate like abstractions through those perceptions and stuff like this. It's really just a matter of us trying to make sense of the world around us. Like it's not like it's like magical or anything. It's descriptive. We apprehended these things the
What
same way
is
we could
descriptive?
apprehend freaking like our experiences.
No,
Like
well,
it's
I
really
don't think that you're taking his question seriously. No offense. I mean, he's getting to the root of what Christians are trying to say, which is that the universe is arranged such that our entire language can be consistent when we use it that way.
Yeah,
Why
like
is that?
I don't care about the language or the definitions. Forget about minds. Forget about people. Forget there's nothing exists in the universe except an object. Why can't that object be black and white? And then you say the define. No, I'm not talking about the definition of the words. I'm just saying why does, or go back to the simplest thing. Why does something have to be what it is? Why can't it be what it's not? Like, why is the universe that way? Like, when we look at it, that's what we see. But why does it have to be that way? Like, when you look at a chair, how come the chair can't suddenly turn into a car? It can't go to be something else. It can't be all black and all white. Why is the universe that way? Like, we have laws of logic because the universe is that way, and our brains evolved, blah, 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 blah. But why is it that way that this thing came? That's the question that they're asking. Why is it that way?
Oh, you're basically answering why does something have its nature?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, well, you can, things are what they are. You know, it's a brute fact. I think you can just end with a brute fact. Why is God the way? You can ask them, why is God the way God is? Well, that's his nature. That's just the way he is. Well, why is something all black, all black? That's just the way it is. It's no different.
Well, and part of it is just, I mean, it could be that it's just a limitation on our brains, but I mean, we can't imagine how it could possibly be. That's why that makes these things logically impossible. So I can't say.
Except that philosophers will disagree with you. They'll say, no. This is not about the limits of human imagination.
Well,
Any possible world
right.
could not be configured.
Right. Well, but it's only no possible world because we can't imagine, we can't even comprehend a world where that would not hold. So I can say, you know, J.D. Kane is not in this hangout right now, but J.D. Kane is also in this hangout right now. That doesn't make sense. He can't be here and not here.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine a world. I can imagine a world where J.D. Kane is in this hangout, and I can imagine a world where J.D. Kane is not in this hangout,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't imagine a world where both are true at the same time in the same way.
I mean, I have my
The sentence would
suspicions
make
about
sense.
that very thing. I really do, and I really wonder, if the philosophers aren't wrong about this, and that it really is because we have no experience, so we can't fathom how it could be, but that perhaps there is some possible world where it could be. But I am consistently told, no, this is not a problem of your imagination or humanity's inability to conjure that possibility. It really never could be possible in any possible world. And they insist on that. But yet, I still doubt. I wonder, too. I kind of feel like you do. Maybe it would be pretty normal if, in fact, somehow there was a world where, things were not themselves. And it was that particular aspect was unpredictable. We wouldn't have that law.
I mean,
But philosophers insist I'm wrong, and I'm still not quite sure why. They just kind of insist it's not right.
I mean, just to comment real quick on what you were saying. I mean, just to comment on these like philosophical problems, right? I mean, sure, yeah, they exist in a sense that we can neither prove nor disprove them. But yeah, I mean that's very much the the point. That we just work with reasons for why we don't tend to take these metaphysical implications seriously. I mean, even if people could lie or play jokes, even if this was like one big dream of Brahma or a Matrix scenario, it wouldn't matter because there are still laws of physics that we have to make sense of, that we, happen to use like our brains to describe our experiences with, that we just can't get out. We have to just keep going with that regardless. So to say that there are different realities for different people is moot and ridiculous. There's a reality that we're part of, and we're trying to make sense of. That's what we could actually say about this.
Well, that's true. I mean, I wouldn't want to open up a whole can of worms about that. But maybe Floyd, maybe you could give it a try and explain why it is that these absolutes would necessarily hold in every possible world.
Yeah,
And why it's
fully.
not that there's something about humanity where we can't think well enough.
Well, just to clarify, those absolutes don't even hold in our world. Like, that's the first thing you'd bring up to them. I mean, like, for example, I worked in motor control. And in motor control, you use fuzzy logic. Fuzzy logic is, one of the grounding principle of it, is that a statement isn't true or false. I mean, this is a real thing. I mean, it's used in motor control, real things, actual devices. And if you look at the quantum level, explanations for quantum behavior, you have to ignore those classical laws of logic. So they're not absolute.
Do you have to ignore the law of identity even in quantums, or can't you say, during this time period, this identity, like the identity switches back and forth? Well, no, they're not. They're saying the way you think of it should switch back and forth.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, you're
I'm not talking
assuming
about things
Aristotelian logic. There's more than just Aristotelian
Yeah,
logic.
exactly. Exactly. So those classical laws of logic are not absolutes.
So even something like the law of non-contradiction,
Exactly.
it's already not absolute?
Not on a quantum level. You have to understand, like, those laws, the entire basis, and that's one of the things, like, you have to separate in this discussion the underlying nature of reality versus the way we interpret it. So here's a very easy thing. Imagine a person, okay? Imagine a person who has no memory. They observe but have no memory.
Mm-hmm.
What would the universe look like to that person? They wouldn't have cause and effect. They wouldn't have the law of identity. They wouldn't have the law of non-contradiction. Like, they would see contradictory things all the time.
Absolutely.
So that person, if you ask that person what the laws of logic look like to that person, they would be very different.
Absolutely.
So
Assuming
the
that they
laws
can
of
explain
logic
it
are
to
just
you
the way
like,
we perceive the universe. That's all. They just reflect our mental ability to perceive the universe. And we don't perceive things on a quantum level. Quantum effects make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And when you're introduced to them, I mean, one of the reasons why people couldn't understand the double slit experiment for the longest time is because the first explanation that came out from it, which was from Feynman and the many paths problems, makes absolutely no sense under classical logic. It makes no sense for one single electron to travel every path from the point of origin to the target and interfere with itself along the way. That makes no sense under classical logic. How can you fire one tennis ball and it travels all paths between where you fired and the target, and it actually bounces off itself in the other paths that it's traveling? Under classical logic, that makes no sense. But if you forget about classical logic and just assume that happens, it explains the observables.
Yeah, Aristotelian logic. There's just two possible truth values here, true or false.
yeah,
But there's other logic to have. It's multi-value. There's multi-value logic. There's a bunch of there's first order logic, first order predicate logic, second order predicate logic, modal logic, fuzzy logic. You know, Slick says, oh, the laws of logic, like there's only one system. No, there's multiple systems.
That's the first argument to take against him. As soon as he brings up
that is the things people should say. They should just directly argue that there's nothing transcendent or absolute about those three, statements or what they represent.
Yeah, well, Hogtie Champ brought this up, and Slick just threw it back to him and said, "Wait, you're telling me the law of identity doesn't hold?" He said, no, under different systems it doesn't. It doesn't apply at all.
I mean, Matt Slick basically demonstrated how it was tied to language. He said something nonsensical, then he said something, then he went back to like speaking normal. And it's like, yeah, it basically holds as long as you want to be coherent to another individual. Otherwise, you're just talking gibberish.
Yeah, that is what he said. I think I remember that.
Yeah, he said loose leaps faster than Wednesdays, and it's like,
that's okay, right. He didn't give Hogtie a chance, or he didn't listen to the explanation.
Well, he didn't listen to me. He also didn't listen to Hogtie either. But that's Matt Slick in a nutshell.
But that's because you're possessed by a demon, right? That's why you got the upside down cross on your head.
That's just terrible. How he won't even talk to you, Wolf. I think that's terrible.
Yeah, let him cry. It really doesn't matter. I mean, but the amazing thing is, like, he whined when I'm in the room, but as soon as I get kicked out, he wants to talk shit later on, like, oh yeah, he's a wuss, he can't take me anyway. Like, you're so full of shit.
Yeah, I wish he would be more charitable. Because I'm kind of interested in how it is that he comes to his conclusions. But he's not charitable enough to explain himself, right? He seems to be concerned with, I don't know, appearances or something.
Well,
Looking
Yeah,
like maybe
it's a
something.
game. Yeah, it's a game of just trying to pawn the other person. You know,
absolutely.
if you make one logical fallacy, boom, he's going to hit you on that, and he's going to drill you on that. Because yeah, he just wants to show how irrational the other person is. So if you make one small mistake, he's just going to jump on that.
Well, and his cronies on the side also jump. And what was it? I forget now, but what's Tim Bible thumping wingnut himself jumped on me. What was I saying? The issue was Matt Slick had said, well, you need to be able to give an account of X, and I said, I don't need to do that. I don't need to provide an account of X, and I was about to say, here's why, because we're talking about what you believe, and I don't need to give a positive account. We're just trying to unpack your positive account to see if that makes sense. Then we can go to me. But as soon as I said I don't need to do that, Tim jumps in. I think I got muted at this point, but he said, okay, so here's what you're saying, that logic doesn't matter and nothing
I remember
matters.
this.
Yeah, and he was, just trying to. He totally threw up a straw man of what I was even about to say. I didn't even get it out fully, but. So yeah, and Jungle Jargon has asked, do I have a positive account? It depends on what we're talking about. If you're talking about morality, I think I have an account that I can present. Maybe it's not a fully fleshed out account, but I think it's pretty good, and I'm willing to improve upon it if there's something better that's provided. But and if we're talking about logic, I can try and do my best to give somewhat of an account of that. It might not be satisfactory to a Christian that wants to have these, absolute explanations, but I don't think that the other side, I don't think that the Christians have, and in fact, I think their account of it is weaker than the secular account.
Well, of course, you can't claim to know based on revelation. That by definition means faith. You believe that to be true. You don't know that. To say that would almost be considered heresy. You don't. This isn't knowledge. This is like this personal experience. You faith. Basically, you believe this. In order to know, you'd have to be able to demonstrate it to be the case. And asserting it is just bull. It's ridiculous.
I'm interested in hearing how you would account for logic, Ron. In a space where people are going to mute you.
Take it apart and yeah. Well, I would just say that logic, as Wolf said, and I've said this in the past too. I think that it becomes necessary and falls just out of the creation of language. As soon as we started pointing at things and saying, well, that's a rock and that's a tree and that's a lion. We distinguished and added the not and not a rock and not a tree and not a lion. Now we have introduced concepts that are logical. Now, we didn't develop the laws of logic for a long part of our history until, I don't know, what was it? When was Aristotle? Like a few hundred years before Christ, right? And that's kind of when things became solidified in a way that put them into this kind of regimented and very succinct format that we identify as the laws of logic. But I think people were applying a lot of the concepts in a way that, in just kind of everyday language and things and communications, it had to have been going on, and so that when someone said, something that was just completely illogical and violated those laws, even if they couldn't quite articulate exactly how or why, they knew there was a problem with it. So, the person said, well, I was in the marketplace, and then later they said they were not in the marketplace at the same time. Well, there's a problem there. Can you please explain which one of these was true? Because they can't both be true. So I think it's just this fell out of the reality that we experience and the necessity of language.
How do you account for the fact that the reality that we experience is one that can be described by the language that we have developed?
If our language didn't describe it, it wouldn't be useful. We wouldn't have developed language that, just like...
How do you account for the reality that the language describes?
Well, the reality comes first, right? The reality was there first, the language describes it.
Right, so why is it that
Moonist
like that if not for God?
Well, how's God explain any of this?
God created the universe.
Guarantees, he provides some kind of a guarantee that a Christian is then able to trust all these systems that we are developing to describe the reality. Whereas, if you don't have any kind of guarantee,
That assumes that it is valid to begin with. You're conflating the validity of it to the account for it. The account is this: where does these things come from? The validity of it is you have to show that it's logically valid. If you say, oh, well, God guarantees that logic is valid, you're assuming the validity of logic in that statement. You're assuming that it's valid.
Yes, but you do that too.
Right.
You borrow from my worldview when you make those assumptions.
Borrow. I don't see we're both assuming that logic valid. Because what does it mean for it to be valid? That means it conforms to the laws of logic.
No, what it means to be valid
Helena,
is that God exists.
Let me ask you a question. How do you know that God is guarantees logic? I'll help you out. He reveals.
Yes, he reveals it to me.
How do you know he's not lying? How do you know he's not lying?
Because God can't lie.
And you know that how? Because he told you. Well, yes. any liar could tell you that.
Well,
again, so is this really a guarantee? I don't think so.
Yeah, and here's the thing: even if we grant that it's personal experience, fine, but that's personal to you as an individual. How would we know that was accurate? How would we be able to verify that? That's not. It's not
but
science.
you do know it because you behave as if every single day, right? You go ahead and assume it. I think their point is, at least we can go one step lower and sort of explain the assumption with another assumption. Whereas you don't even have that.
Yeah, but the assumption.
Hold on. That begs the question, though. That begs the question. We're still left with the issue of, this being personal experience being revealed to you, and how would you know it to be the fact? How would you know this as knowledge, not as faith? That's the big bridge you got, because preceptors usually say they know this as a fact. They don't believe this. They know this. They're Gnostics.
I don't know. I think that maybe the faith. It's the. I think the. I don't know. I think the faith gives them the knowledge, or somehow. I'm not exactly sure how somebody like that would explain that. But
you're both that's with assumptions.
Yeah, and that's actually the contradictory thing of it. Faith can never be translated into knowledge. That just doesn't make any sense.
Well, you got to be clear about what branch of Christianity you're talking about here. A Calvinist like Matt Slick has very easy answers to these questions. But going back to the question you were asking is, why is the universe the way that it is? So we communicate in language that we create the laws of logic. That's not a question that's impossible for a naturalist to answer.
Oh, tell me.
Well, basically, the best working idea that we have right now, there are some issues with it, but the best working idea is the multiverse hypothesis. And basically, on a very simple level, what it says is that universes like ours come into being all the time. The only universes that have people in them, that have minds that can ask these questions, are universes that are ordered. Universes where things can be all black and all white, and there's no, there's no law of identity where contradictions run rampant. Minds can't come in that universe because you can't have a planet orbiting around the sun where a planet's not a planet at the same time. So when universes are created, for whatever reason that we don't know, only universes which have these specific set of properties will have minds come up in them. The other universes that are chaotic don't have minds, and this goes on in an infinite big spiral, and the ones that are created that have properties that arise minds are universes like ours. Now, there's a big problem with that, though, and it's called the Boltzmann brain problem. Because in that universe, you're asking about what would a universe be like for a mind to ask the question. And the most probable universe is that that universe has one mind. That's the most probable one. But we don't find ourselves in a universe with one brain, with one mind. There's many, many minds. And coming on how to solve that problem is an unsolved problem in physics. And there's some great lectures on YouTube about it. It's highly technical. There's a lot of math, a lot of physics. But that's like an atheist and a naturalist doesn't need to run away from that question. They can answer it. I mean, we are.
Okay, but explain why. I mean, you just said that the one that would make the most sense would be a universe with only one mind.
That's the most probable.
Why is that?
Well, that's the most probable because it's more probable to have one than to have two, to have three, to have four, to have five. Like the most simple model is that only have, because you're basically what you're asking is for someone to ask a question. Why does the universe exist? There has to be a mind, right? There has to be one mind. Well, it doesn't need to be 10 or 50 or 100. It's going to be more probable for there to be one mind than 1,000 of the same events, right?
But there could be universes where there's one mind.
Right.
It also sounds like the whole invoking of solipsism and stuff, in which case we neither prove nor prove it, so to speculate on it is rather nonsensical. I mean, it's like I said, I mean, I can understand people having different perceptions of reality rather than, having different realities for different people. I mean, anyone else assuming otherwise, where the facts are otherwise well established, is otherwise delusional.
That could be. That's sort of. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're sort of adding a new element to the conversation. I'd like to stick with the gorilla for just a second. I'm looking for your name.
Cliff.
Cliff. Can you explain to me why even not necessarily Aristotelian thinkers will still say that, for example, the law of non-contradiction couldn't hold in any universe?
Say it again.
I'm sorry, must hold in every possible universe.
It doesn't even hold in our universe.
So they're just wrong.
Yeah, like when I talked about before about, and Floyd said, as he said before, there are other types of logic. These are not things that are made up. Like, they actually correspond to reality. You have to use them. Like, a friend of mine worked in motor control, and I did some math for him way back when I was doing my master's. And you use fuzzy logic. And fuzzy logic is one of a thing has to be either true or false, right? The statement has to be either true or false. It's one of the classic laws of logic. In fuzzy logic, abandons that. And we built a motor using this logic. Many motors are built using fuzzy logic. It's a real thing. It maps onto the real world. Reality actually does work like that. When you go on to a quantum level, reality works very oddly. Like I said before, and you have to abandon classical. I mean, the reason why people couldn't even, approach quantum mechanics for the longest time was because we, on a physical level, with our eyeballs and our ears, have evolved to perceive a very basic understanding of the world that comes into those three laws. But on a quantum level, we can't see that, you can't interact with it, so our whole common sense approach goes out the window. You just have to throw that away.
So even identity itself?
Yeah, like I said, it doesn't make any sense. I'll give you a very easy question. I'll just ask you. This is not a trick question, right?
Okay.
So if I take a tennis ball and I dip it down into a bucket of ink, and I fire it at a wall, one tennis ball, and hits the wall, what do you expect to see on the wall?
a spot where the tennis ball lets
Right,
in.
a black dot. That's a
Yeah.
very easy thing to see, right? A
Yes,
black
yes.
dot.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can do experiments like this on a quantum level, and you throw a tennis ball, and the tennis ball doesn't leave a black dot on the wall. The tennis ball leaves a pattern of dots on the wall, as if the tennis ball was traveling in every path between when you throw it and when it hits the wall, and it's actually interfering with itself. It's actually hitting other tennis balls as if you were throwing them, but you're only throwing them one at a time. Now, how can you explain that under classical logic? You can't, but it happens. Now, they don't throw tennis balls, they throw electrons.
Right.
But
Yeah,
what
so
you see on the other side is a pattern which acts exactly like the tennis ball when you threw it, went into an infinite number of tennis balls that traveled all the infinite paths. They actually interacted and smashed around with each other and moved around. And what you get basically is a pattern that actually diffuses out. You don't get a pattern of single hits like you get from a tennis ball. And you can't explain it under classical logic, which is why people struggle with it for so long.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily like a problem so much as it's a limitation in physics. You know, it's just hard to like line up like the exact location and how fast it's going at the same time. It hits the ear wrong, but you know,
Yeah, you can't measure it.
that's why we got those particle accelerators to try and figure out how the quantum world works. You know, line up with,
No, that's the thing. That's really
There's
critical. You
always
can't
an
measure it.
electron. It's
Yeah,
still an
you can't measure
electron.
it.
It doesn't change.
Right, but that's a critical point where he said, well, it's just a limitation of physics because you don't know where the electron's going. No, you can't. That's the other part, which gets even weirder.
Yeah.
If you actually put a detector between where you throw the tennis ball and the wall so that you can measure where the tennis ball goes, the detector fires, you see the tennis ball, and then it leaves a dot on the wall. If you take the detector away, the dot goes away, and it now behaves like it's going an infinite. But as soon as you try to measure it, it goes back to traveling one path. If you take away the measurement, it doesn't travel on one path. Now it appears to travel on every path.
Right.
But that happens. Like, that's a
The
really
theories that
physical
explain
thing.
that, they don't ever say, well, the electron's not an electron.
But
Yeah,
it's both at a position and not at a position at the same time.
yeah, but to say like the law of non-contradiction always holds in all possible worlds. Yeah, that assumes under that system of logic. So it's true on all possible worlds because under that system of logic, that is defining what is possible. That's how you determine what is possible. So if something violates the law of non-contradiction under Aristotelian logic, then it's not possible. But if you have a different system like fuzzy logic, then that doesn't hold. The idea, it's the question of whether or not it's possible or not, it doesn't even apply because it's a different. It's like it's like the difference between playing checkers and chess. There are different rules. In chess, when you capture, in all possible games of chess, you win when you capture the king, right? Without exception. Okay, now, apply that to checkers.
Right.
You can't do it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm thinking that if I were Matt Slick, I would feel like saying what I said, which is, you're talking about strange behaviors, and maybe there's things we don't understand about time, and maybe electrons behave differently. But I'm saying it's never an electron and not an electron at the same time.
Well,
It's
it's in a
always an
particular position
electron.
and not in a particular position at the same time.
It can be in a different position. I'm talking about actual identity.
Right, so just think about what you're saying. When you say an electron is in a position and not in a position at the same time, it means if you go to that position, there is something there that is an electron, and there's something there that's not an electron. And it's the same something. Now, isn't that a violation of the law of identity? Whatever the thing is at that position is both an electron and not an electron.
And not an electron. It seems to me like it is a violation.
And that's why people struggle with quantum mechanics for the longest time. And one of the first things you do when you teach quantum mechanics is to tell people your notions of common sense and your classical laws of logic, you just have to leave them at the door.
That's
This
right.
is not
You just
how
have
things
to
behave
memorize.
on a quantum level.
When you take it in undergrad, you just have to trust and memorize.
Well, it can
Yeah,
confuse a lot of people.
And you can repeat the sentence, but it doesn't mean your head's wrapped around it. It kind of reminds me of when Christians explain the Trinity, right? Is that they memorize and they can repeat the sentences, but it's not clear that they really their heads wrapped around it. And that's how I felt when I was taking, undergrad little piece of quantum mechanics.
Well, one of the big things that Matt Slick does that no one ever brings him up on is he says something like, oh, so you're saying there's a violation in the law of logic. And you're saying, yeah, sure there is. And he says, okay, purple sleeps faster than Wednesday, therefore Jesus is God. He makes some kind of nonsensical gibberish thing.
Yeah.
And it's not at all rational to say because there is an exception, there is no pattern. What you're saying is there's an exception, but the pattern still holds. It's like saying, well, I have a doctor. The doctor made a mistake when he did his last surgery. Oh, that means every surgery he does is mistaken.
That's
No,
right.
it doesn't.
Or, doctors in and of themselves are crap. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't occur to people to say that. Because if you try to address that nonsense sentence for the point he's trying to make with it, he won't let you. He'll just say another nonsense sentence.
Yeah, he'll say, see, now you're assuming the laws of logic, therefore Christian God exists.
Checkmate.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, so it's another gotcha kind of thing that makes it really difficult to try to really see what he means.
I mean, it's not really an argument for God. It's an argument for, just...
It's an argument for Aristotelian logic.
It's an argument to get the skeptic to stop questioning their faith, and it's just a shift to the burden of proof with just some bullshit grandiose assertion. It's just not the case at all. I mean, we use like logic and language are necessarily tied together. It exists as an adaptation for our species. We use that as well as these general abstractions produced by the mind to make sense of it. Descriptive. It's not dependent on anything supernatural. That begs the question.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to be, but you would have to say more than just say that it's not. Right?
But again, what is God adding to the equation here?
Some kind of grounding, some kind of stopping point, some kind of place where the constant question ends.
Well, it's the prime mover argument, right? All of these arguments, whether it's morality or logic, are all a prime mover argument. They're in different forms, but they're all a prime mover argument. Why is the universe, why do we have morals? Because God is moral. Why does the universe operate in such a way that the laws of logic that we interpret in our language, all this is created? Because God is logical. They're just prime mover arguments, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the coin is five ways, or just variation of the prime mover. The cosmological, the teleological, the contingency argument. It's just all, there has to be some initial thing which all other things come from.
Right, and the properties of that thing are reflected in the properties that it creates. And that's not an unreasonable argument. Like, just assume for a minute that a God created the universe and a God is ordered. Well, then you'd expect his creation to be ordered. That's not an unreasonable leap. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't expect something who didn't have, like, for example, if you were to make something and you didn't have the ability, like you didn't have order, you didn't have rationality, you didn't have logic, it's not that likely to think that your creation would be. So that's where their argument comes from. But I said you can easily explain it on a naturalist perspective. There's no reason to say that the universe we live in, like you can say, why is the universe ordered? Which is what they're asking, like, why does the universe obey cause and effect? Why is the law of conservation of momentum in our universe? Because we wouldn't exist if it didn't. what is universe? Why is there a universe that has brains in it? Then you can go back to the multiverse. You can explain this. Like, there's absolutely no reason to say. And that's where Metzlick always does this. He says, well, look, there's only two possibilities, God and not God. I can provide a solution. You can't. Therefore, I win. You can easily provide a solution. Why does he do that?
Again, to account for something, and they say, well, how do you account for? All it means is have a story for. What's your story for why something exists? Oh, I don't know, the pixie of that created it. Okay, there's a story. It's as good a story as their story.
Only logic pixies can account for logic.
Yeah, because it reflects their nature.
Yeah.
But again, it's how does logic reflect God's nature? They don't say how. And God is logical. Well, that assumes logic. It's question begging. It's not an answer.
Well, I think I'm going to wrap up the hangout. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I know you guys could probably carry on longer than this, but I've got to get to bed and take care of some family issues here tonight before I go to bed anyhow. So thanks everyone who has participated, and to all of our viewers. Does anyone want to have a final word before we go offline?
Thanks for having me.
Dare to know there's no knowledge that is not power.
All right. Well, have a good night and a good weekend. Hope everybody enjoys their weekend. Take care.
I know.